In a bustling Indian marketplace, where fear ruled and injustice thrived, a woman in simple clothes stood behind a small fruit stall. No one knew she was actually an IPS officer, undercover on a dangerous mission to expose the corruption that had ruined countless lives. But when a corrupt inspector slapped her in front of the entire market, he had no idea that his one mistake would destroy his empire of power and fear forever. What followed was a night that changed everything. A story of courage, justice, and the power of truth. So watch this video carefully till the end. And don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. Now, let's begin. It was a sultry evening in the small Indian city of Mirzapur, where the air itself seemed to hang heavy with silence and fear. The shops were closing early, not because the day was done, but because the traders had learned that staying open too long could cost them their lives. Under the flickering light of an old street lamp, a woman in a faded salwar kameez rode a rusted bicycle down a narrow lane. Her face was half covered with a dupatta, her eyes sharp yet weary. To everyone passing by, she looked like a poor fruit vendor, someone invisible in the chaos of the city. But in truth, she was District Magistrate Anya Mehta, one of the most powerful officers in the region, out tonight under disguise. Anya had spent months receiving anonymous letters from local shopkeepers. They spoke of an inspector named Raghav Tiwari, a man whose uniform had become a weapon. He was supposed to protect them, yet he bled them dry. Every week he demanded protection money. Those who refused lost their shops, their dignity, and sometimes their lives. Official reports called it accidental fires. Anya called it murder in uniform. For weeks she tried to build a case from her office, but the paperwork always vanished, the witnesses withdrew, and higher officials whispered, "Madam, this isn't your fight." That night she realized something. To clean a rotten system, one must first step into the filth. She had spent the afternoon smearing a fake burn mark across her cheek, wearing old glass bangles, and tying her hair in a loose bun like any common woman in the marketplace. Now, as she entered the main bazaar, the smell of dust, smoke, and sweat filled her lungs. She parked her bicycle near a tea stall where an old man, trembling with age, was boiling milk over a dim kerosene stove. "Baba," she asked softly, "why are you open so late?" The old tea seller looked up in surprise, his eyes darting around before he whispered, "Beta, tonight the collection happens. If we don't pay, our shops will burn before morning." Anya's heart clenched, but she kept her voice steady. "Who collects the money?" He looked over his shoulder. "Inspector Raghav and his boys. 5 lakh from each shop this month. The ones who can't pay, God help them." Before Anya could ask more, bright headlights cut through the darkness. A police jeep roared into the lane, scattering dust. The old man froze, his cup slipping from his hand. The jeep stopped in front of the row of shops, and out stepped Inspector Raghav, a tall man with a smug grin and eyes that glimmered with arrogance. 4 constables followed, each gripping a wooden baton. The market went silent. No one dared breathe. One by one, shopkeepers walked up to him and handed over small envelopes, their hands shaking. But one young man refused. He looked barely 22, thin but defiant, his shirt soaked with sweat. His name was Ramesh Yadav, and his small cloth shop had been his father's dream. "I can't pay this month," Ramesh said, his voice trembling. "My mother is sick. I barely have money for her medicine." Inspector Raghav laughed, a dry, cruel laugh. "Then maybe your shop will pay for her treatment," he sneered. He gestured to his men. 2 constables dragged Ramesh out and doused his shop in kerosene. Anya's heart pounded as she fumbled inside her small bag, turning on her hidden camera. Flames erupted, roaring upward as Ramesh screamed, "No! My shop, please." The fire painted the sky orange. People watched in horror but stayed still. No one dared to move, not even to help. Raghav tossed a bundle of cash at Ramesh's feet and said, "Next time, think before you forget your duties." Anya's hands trembled, but she kept recording. She wanted to scream, to tear off her disguise and arrest him right there. But she knew it would all vanish as an officer overstepping her limits. She needed evidence. Real, undeniable evidence. When the jeep finally left and the smoke settled, she approached Ramesh, who was sitting on the ground, staring at the ashes. "You must fight back," she said quietly. Ramesh looked up, his eyes red. "Madam, you don't understand. In this city, fighting back means dying twice. Once by fire, once by fear." Anya swallowed hard. She understood more than he thought. That night, as she rode back to her government quarters, her mind was ablaze like that burning shop. She unlocked her drawer, took out her official seal, and placed it beside a small camera card. Her eyes were steady now. "This ends," she whispered to herself. "Not tomorrow. Tonight." That night, under the faint hum of the ceiling fan, she drafted a secret plan, a plan that would soon shake the city of Mirzapur to its core. The next morning, the city of Mirzapur woke up to a strange silence. The charred remains of Ramesh's little shop still smoked faintly in the early sunlight. Neighbors had swept the ashes aside, pretending nothing had happened. That was how survival worked there. Forget fast, stay quiet, keep breathing. But inside the district collector's bungalow, the silence was different, sharp, deliberate, dangerous. DM Anya Mehta sat at her desk, her hair tied neatly, eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night. Before her lay the memory card from her hidden camera. The footage showed everything. Inspector Raghav laughing as he burned the shop, the terrified faces of the shopkeepers, the envelopes of cash. It was enough to bring the whole network crashing down. If only the system itself wasn't part of the network. Anya called her most trusted aide, Sunil Pradhan, a young, sharp intelligence officer from Lucknow. He entered quietly, saluting her. "Madam, you didn't sleep again." She gave a faint smile. "Sleep is a luxury for those who don't carry a dead city on their shoulders." Sunil hesitated. "You found something, didn't you?" Anya turned the laptop around. The screen flickered with the video clip. Raghav's face illuminated by the fire, his voice dripping arrogance. "My orders are above the law." Sunil clenched his fists. "This is enough to hang him." Anya shook her head. "No, this is enough to make him run." "He's not working alone, Sunil. There's someone bigger, a man in the shadows." Sunil frowned. "The superintendent, maybe. Or a minister," Anya said quietly. "Whoever it is will need to go deeper. This won't be fought in offices. It'll be fought in the alleys he controls." That evening, Anya changed again. This time, she became a fruit seller named Shanti Devi. She wore a torn sari, wrapped her face with an old dupatta, and pushed a rickety cart filled with guavas and bananas into the same marketplace. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but rage buried too deep. The market seemed ordinary in the daylight. Children ran barefoot between stalls. The smell of fried pakoras mixed with sweat and dust, and the old tea seller nodded at her quietly, recognizing her from the night before, but saying nothing. The man's silence was his loyalty. Then she saw it again. The same police jeep crawling through the lane like a predator marking its territory. But Raghav wasn't driving this time. Behind the tinted glass sat a man in a black suit, wearing gold-rimmed glasses and a calm, chilling smile. Raghav got out and opened the door for him. Their handshake wasn't of respect, it was of partnership. Anya moved her cart closer, pretending to arrange her fruits. From under her shawl, she took out a small hidden camera button fixed on her collar. The suited man handed Raghav a brown leather briefcase. "Delhi wants the next collection doubled," he said, his voice low but steady. "The elections are coming. Funds are needed." Raghav smirked. "Don't worry, sir. Fear is the fastest way to raise money." Anya's stomach turned. Delhi. That meant the rot was national. Suddenly, a boy, barefoot, hardly 10, ran into the jeep by accident, spilling the man's cup of tea. Raghav slapped him hard across the face. "You filthy rat," he shouted. The boy stumbled back, crying. The man in the suit just adjusted his glasses, expressionless. Anya's fingers gripped the cart handle tightly. She wanted to rush in, but instead she whispered, "Not yet." That night in her office, she played the new footage again and again. Sunil stood behind her, watching silently. "That man," Anya said, pausing the video. "Find out who he is." Sunil zoomed in on the image. "The car number plate says UP31AA0919. I'll trace it." The next day, he returned with the answer. "Registered to Arvind Sinha, ex-MLA, currently an advisor to the Home Ministry. He funds the Shakti Foundation, an NGO that supposedly supports police welfare." Anya gave a hollow laugh. Shakti Foundation, how ironic. Power feeding corruption. The plan formed in her mind like fire catching oil. "We're going after them," she said. "But first we need more proof. Something undeniable. If I make a move now, they'll bury me alive." Sunil looked uneasy. "Madam, going alone could be dangerous." "I won't be alone," she replied. Truth walks with me. Over the next few days, Anya built a secret circle. Apart from Sunil, there was Ramesh, the young shopkeeper whose store had burned, Farida, a journalist known for exposing scams, and Karen, a quiet cyber expert from Delhi who owed Anya a favor. Together they formed what they called Project Prerna, named after a word Anya's late mother used to repeat, "Inspiration is the seed of rebellion." Every night, they met in the old library behind the collectorate, its dusty shelves now turned into a war room. Maps, photos, phone records, and handwritten notes filled the table. Karen hacked into the Foundation's data servers, finding payment records disguised as charity grants. Farida gathered testimonies from shopkeepers who had fled Mirzapur after losing everything, and Sunil followed Raghav's jeep for 3 nights straight, noting every stop. But the city had eyes everywhere. One evening, as Sunil returned from a surveillance spot, a motorcycle followed him. He turned into a narrow lane to lose them, but 2 men jumped out of the shadows. A blow landed on his shoulder. Blood trickled down his temple. Before blacking out, he managed to send one message to Anya, the warehouse. East Industrial Zone, Friday, proof inside. Then the line went dead. When Anya reached the hospital later, Sunil lay unconscious, his face bruised, his phone smashed. The doctor said he might not wake up soon. Anya felt something inside her crack, not fear but fury. She stood by his bed whispering, "You're not dying for nothing, Sunil." That night, thunder rolled across Mirzapur as she drove to the East Industrial Zone. The warehouse stood deserted, its metal shutters half rusted, the smell of petrol in the air. With a small flashlight, she slipped inside. Rows of crates lined the walls. But these weren't ordinary goods. Inside were rifles, cash bundles, and ledgers filled with transactions. Every entry bore initials, RSASHM. Her heart pounded. Raghav Singh, Arvind Sinha, Home Ministry. She took photos, every angle, every page. Then suddenly, footsteps. "Who's there?" a voice barked. Anya ducked behind a crate. A beam of flashlight swept past her. It was one of Raghav's men. She held her breath, her hand gripping the edge of a metal rod. The guard turned away, muttering, and she slipped out silently into the rain. By the time she reached home, drenched and trembling, dawn was breaking. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "We know what you're doing, madam. Stop or you'll join your friends in the morgue." She looked at the message, then deleted it. Her face was pale but resolute. That morning she went straight to her superior, the district superintendent of police, Pradeep Chauhan. She placed a sealed folder on his desk. "Proof against Inspector Raghav and his network. I need immediate authorization to launch raids." Pradeep glanced at the papers, then leaned back with a smirk. "You're brave, madam, but you don't know how high this goes. These aren't men you arrest, they're men you salute." Anya met his gaze coldly. "Then I'll salute the law, not the criminals who wear it." That evening she walked out of his office, more certain than ever that she was surrounded by snakes. But she also knew something else. Snakes fear fire. As the sun set over Mirzapur, Anya looked at the skyline from her balcony, her eyes burning with resolve. "You took their money. You burned their dreams," she whispered. "Now I'll burn your empire." And so began Operation Agni, the plan that would soon turn Mirzapur's corrupt underworld upside down and make Anya Mehta the most feared name in the entire state. The night the city woke up to sirens, Mirzapur felt like a beast dragged into the light. Word had spread, quietly at first, then like wildfire through the cramped lanes and tea shop gossip, that something monumental was about to happen. Project Prerna had done what it could to prepare. They had printed affidavits, copied ledgers, encrypted the evidence in 3 separate secure servers, and briefed a handful of honest officers who still remembered why they had worn khaki in the first place. Anya stood at the head of a small convoy outside the collectorate as dusk sank into the sky. Her face was tired but resolute. For once the disguise was unnecessary. Around her were the people who had refused to look the other way. Sunil, bandaged but awake and fierce. Farida, camera in hand, determined to make the truth impossible to bury. Ramesh, who wore an eastern kurta with ash still under his fingernails and a look of quiet iron resolve. And Karen, who moved with the nervous energy of someone whose life had recently become a ledger of risks. They divided the city like a chessboard. The plan was simple in its brutality. Hit the nodes, warehouse, the local police station known as the collection point, and the hotel ballroom where the minister's men met. Each strike would be simultaneous. There would be no leaks, no second chances. Operation Agni would either burn the network to ash or burn the city with them. At 11:07 p.m., the first van moved. Farida's crew parked 3 streets away from the hotel and positioned themselves beneath the neon sign of a bridal shop. She checked her lenses and felt the familiar tremor. Journalism was not just telling stories anymore. It had become an act of war. Sunil, shaky but composed, led the team that swung into the warehouse. With pre-authorized warrants, Anya had pushed through after a clandestine legal brief with a sympathetic public prosecutor in another town. They smashed the padlock with a battering ram. Men inside cried orders and confusion. The raid yielded crates upon crates of cash, gun stocks, and a wall of ledgers that read like a who's who of corruption. Initials, dates, bank transfers disguised as NGO aid. In a locked glass case, they found a list, handwritten and blood-smeared names of local businessmen who had been managed for years. Across town, men in plain clothes descended upon the district police station in coordinated sweeps. The constables who had once taken orders with cocked heads now found themselves staring at evidence pinned to the wall. Photos, videos, witness testimonies. For some, it was a moment of terrible realization. For others, an opportunity. A handful of officers stepped forward to surrender records they had been ordered to misplace. At the hotel, Raghav and his patron, Arvind Sinha, sat in a private room flushed with cheap bourbon and the arrogance of men who had never considered consequences. Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden arrival of uniformed officers who had been coaxed, promised and threatened into cooperation by Anya. Raghav tried to command the room, but when the deputy superintendent slapped a set of handcuffs on his wrist, the expression on his face slid from arrogance to something like naked panic. Arvind attempted to escape, but Farida's live stream had already captured his attempts. Within 10 minutes, his car was boxed in. Anya watched him through the hotel's security glass, her jaw clenched so tightly that a vein stood out on her neck. It wasn't clean. Chaos never is. There were scuffles in alleys where men with political muscle had been tipped off. A policeman shot at close range as he tried to stop a fleeing aide, and a news van that careened off a median. Across the city, candles were lit outside shops, not in mourning but in solidarity, an ancient habit of signaling communal strength. Mirzapur, long used to being kept small by fear, breathed for the first time without permission. When the sun rose, the world had changed. Headlines screamed across channels and newspapers. Mirzapur corruption ring exposed. Inspector and MLA arrested. Collectorate leads historic crackdown. Arvind Sinha's mugshot splashed across the front page with his gold-rimmed glasses askew, a man who had once smiled to camera lenses, now looking like a caged animal. The Shakti Foundation's bank accounts were frozen, and the names that had once been safe in the backrooms of power were now chanted in small tea shops and shouted from stoops. But the victory had costs. Sunil's injuries were worse than anyone had allowed themselves to admit. He woke slowly in the hospital with parts of his memories tripping over the shock. He flinched when a door slammed, and for 2 days could not look any footage directly. His recovery was guarded by physiotherapy and the presence of those who would not leave his bedside. Anya visited every day, bringing sweets and a folder of lists, small tasks he could do to feel useful, to stitch himself back into life. Karan vanished for 2 days in the wake of the raids. He didn't reply to messages, and the whole of silence made Anya's stomach knot. When he returned, he sat across from her at the library table, exhausted and worn in a way that spoke of sleep stolen in airport lounges and the company of people with too many faces. "I had to make a choice," he said quietly. "They offered me protection and money to hand over your next move. I pretended to fold, but I slipped you the one key they left exposed, the secure log of their transfers. If I hadn't gone in that circle, Arvind might still be gone." Karen's shoulders shook. "I betrayed a contract of fear to save a city." Anya looked at him with something like both gratitude and reprimand. There was a line she understood, between betrayal and sacrifice, that pragmatists with clean consciences refused to name. Then came the trials, the ugly public court hearings where men who had felt untouchable now squirmed under the light. The public prosecutor stitched together the mountain of evidence collected by Project Prerna. Farida's broadcasted footage became a cornerstone. Ramesh sat in the witness box and spoke slowly about the night his shop burned. His voice did not break. "I lost everything," he said, "but the truth found a home in me." He was not rewarded with riches. Instead, the municipality offered him a small stall in a new market rebuilding project and temporary grant money for his mother's medical treatment. The city's small victories were practical and precise. Licenses reissued, restitution claims filed, a modest but meaningful fund to help victims. Anya's most difficult trial was not in courtrooms or press conferences, but inside her own conscience. The arrests had not erased the rot. It only exposed one branch. At a press conference, she kept her tone measured, and yet the cameras caught the corner of her expression. A woman who had walked into many rooms convinced, irrationally perhaps, that justice could be neat. Power, she learned in those weeks, rearranged itself like water finding cracks. Men like Arvind had masked themselves as philanthropists. Men with initials on ledgers had names elsewhere. One evening, after a long day of hearings, Anya sat with Farida on the steps of the collectorate. They watched the city, children playing in puddles, shopkeepers sweeping out soot from front porches, rebuild in small gestures. "We started a fire to burn the rot," Farida said. "But the heat will have to be kept up." That night, a letter arrived. It was not a threat, but a slender, folded piece of paper with a single line in an unfamiliar hand. "You have time, not victory." The king's fingers extend beyond Mirzapur. The codename U42 was scrawled across the fold. Anya felt the old cold loom of a larger conspiracy descend like fog. She had won a war in Mirzapur, but the battle that hummed in the margins was a different shape entirely. In the months that followed, the city changed in ways both tender and slow. The new market that housed Ramesh's stall bloomed with customers who came not out of fear, but out of a sense of belonging. Mothers let their daughters walk to bakery stores on their own again. The tea seller who had first whispered about the collection sat at his stall in the same corner, his hands steady, a small tin of sweets now on his counter, gifts from the community. Farida won a National Journalism Award, though she insisted she had merely followed a story that refused to die quietly. Sunil, who had returned to duty with a limp and louder convictions, received a bravery medal and the nickname the Iron Breath among the youth who had followed the raids on live streams. Arvind's trial became a spectacle. The recordings Karan had secured were played like grotesque lullabies. The handoffs, the bribes, the laughter after a shop burned. Members of the Shakti Foundation were sentenced. Small-time policemen were dismissed and jailed. But in the gallery of the courtroom there were empty chairs. Some witnesses had left the country. Some had been bought off, and a few were too frightened to testify. It was a lesson in the reach of power. Remove one head and another sometimes swelled in its place. Anya thought about what to do next. The letter V42 and the whispered names in the margins told her one thing plainly. The game was bigger. There were corporate plates, offshore accounts, and the kind of legal obfuscation that made corruption a craft of respectable people in respectable houses. She couldn't, she realized, keep hacking away at the weeds with a broom. She needed tools that did not burn out. Institutions, laws, culture. She instituted a citizens' oversight board, a helpline that connected anonymous tipsters to legal aid, and a mobile verification unit that could audit sudden transfers. It was less dramatic than a midnight raid, but perhaps more stubborn in its work. And still, there were moments of human tenderness that steadied her. Ramesh's mother presenting Anya with a hand-stitched scarf at a community event. A schoolchild reading an essay that listed Anya among people who make things right. And the tea seller who, one morning, pressed a cup into her hands without asking and simply said, "You came back." These small stabilizers were the salt to a wound that had been kept raw by years of abuse. At the same time, the people who had been toppled were not silent. They lobbied. They hired expensive lawyers. They whispered about loopholes and appeals that would take years. News outlets debated whether Mirzapur's upheaval was a triumph or a spectacle. Some conservative voices argued that the rule of law had been endangered by a rogue officer. Those voices were shouted down by mothers who had been paid off for silence and by sons who had watched their fathers. Livelihoods turned to ash. The debate was messy and necessary. Democracy, Anya reflected, was not the absence of noise but the allowance of it. Then, at a low moment, when court backstabbing and political maneuvering slowed the pace of convictions, Anya received a photograph in a plain envelope. It was a picture of a child, no more than 9, standing in front of a burnt shop with a chalkboard that read, "I want a school, not taxes for bullets." The photograph was unsigned, but its message was not. She folded the picture and placed it on the map in the war room. "For them," she whispered. "For the child." The closure, when it came, was neither complete nor comforting. Arvind was sentenced to a decade for fraudulent funding and conspiracy. Raghav received a long term for arson and extortion and died in prison under circumstances that were investigated, then shrugged off as a heart attack. Some ministers were indicted. Others, with cleaner records and better lawyers, walked. The Shakti Foundation was dissolved, its assets frozen. But the bigger mystery, a man or group coded as U42, remained unresolved. The trail went cold in offshore accounts and shell companies, and when the whispers named cities hundreds of kilometers away, Anya understood she had cut off an arm, but the head still thought itself clever and distant. Mirzapur, however, had changed. Its people no longer drew fearful lines when officers stood at the market. They drew questions. They gathered in town halls, they filed complaints, and they helped one another rebuild. The city's new market opened with a ribbon cut by a woman who had once donned a dupatta to sell fruit, and now stood openly as its collector. She spoke briefly, and when she left the podium, Ramesh, older in a way beyond his years, embraced her not as an official but as someone who had walked into their darkest rooms and refused to look away. In the quiet that followed the public storms, Anya sat at her desk with the final dossier labeled U42, incomplete. She traced the letters with a pen and then folded the file into a locked drawer. The war had been costly and imperfect, but it had reawakened something in the city, a willingness to witness. She had expected the guilt of victory to feel triumphant. Instead, it felt like a responsibility multiplied. On a late summer evening, as pigeons settled on the old statue in the central square and a child chased a paper kite, Anya walked back through the market that had once hidden so many sins. Vendors called out friendly prices. A woman sold mangoes with a laugh that reached her eyes. At the tea stall where she had first spoken with the trembling old man, she paused. He looked up and said nothing for a long moment. Then, surprising them both, he spoke. "Madam, when I closed earlier, I thought safety meant shutting the door and keeping the heat out. Now I know safety means owning the flame together." Anya looked at him and finally allowed a small, tired smile. She pocketed the photograph of the child with the chalkboard and walked to the edge of the market, where the skyline opened to the dark. Unseen beyond the city, committee rooms and shadowed offices still hummed with plans and defenses. Somewhere the code U42 still pulsed like a faint signal. She could choose to rest or to move. She had promised a city justice. The promise had become a ledger of further obligations. She folded her shoulders under the weight of it and felt, for the first time in months, not the blind heat of anger, but the slow, patient warmth of something that could endure. "One city at a time," she said to the night, and then more fiercely, "one voice at a time." Mirzapur slept with more sleep in it than before, but Anya did not. She opened her desk drawer, slid the U42 file into a secure envelope, and wrote a single, small note on top, "Begin." Then she drafted a list, names of people she would need, places to travel, legal avenues to pursue. The fight had widened its map. She was not naive enough to believe an end was in sight, only that an imperative had been set. Outside, thunder rolled far away, and the city's lamps flickered. Children played beneath lamps that burned a little brighter now. In the morning, someone would sweep a street and tie a child's hair with a ribbon. Anya drew a breath and let the air change her. Whatever U42 was, Mirzapur had learned to speak, and once a people have found the habit of speaking truth, power grows lonely and brittle.